Emily was planting flowers on her own lawn when police cruisers screeched to a halt, accusing her of violating HOA rules that didn't even apply to her home. Across the street, Karen Miller, the self-appointed queen of the neighborhood, stood smirking, certain her call had sealed our fate. But Emily had one card no one expected: the authority of a U.S. Army military police captain, and you won't believe how this quiet Texas suburb witnessed justice flip the entire story on its head. When Emily and I bought our little house on the edge of a Texas suburb, it felt like a fresh start. Quiet streets, wide skies, and most importantly, no HOA breathing down our necks. We'd both grown up under those endless lists of rules: what color your shutters could be, how tall your grass could grow, whether you could park your own truck in your own driveway. This house was our escape from all of that. But right across the street lived Karen Miller, the self-appointed queen of the neighboring HOA. From the moment we unloaded our first box, her eyes were on us. She'd stroll over with her clipboard, casually reminding us of regulations that didn't apply to our home. It was obvious, in her mind, every inch of this street belonged to her kingdom. That spring evening, Emily knelt by the fence, her hands deep in rich soil, planting a line of marigolds she'd been excited about for weeks. The air smelled like fresh-cut grass, the kind of peaceful suburban evening you wait all winter for. I was in the garage sorting tools, half listening to the soft scrape of her trowel. Then the sound shattered. Sirens, not distant, not passing by, coming right for us. 2 police cruisers swung into our street and stopped dead in front of our house. The calm dissolved in a single heartbeat. I stepped out of the garage just as Emily looked up, frozen mid-motion, soil clinging to her fingers. Both cruiser doors opened in perfect sync. 2 uniformed officers stepped out, their boots hitting the pavement with sharp, deliberate thuds. They didn't glance around. They didn't hesitate. They walked straight toward Emily. "Ma'am, you need to stop what you're doing immediately," the taller one said, his voice firm, official. Emily blinked. "Excuse me?" "There's been a complaint," the second officer added. "You're violating HOA regulations and refusing inspection of the property." For a second, the words didn't even make sense. Emily stayed on her knees, trowel hanging limp in her hand, as the soil slipped slowly from her fingers back into the flower bed. My chest tightened, a cold rush of disbelief hitting me all at once. Police? For planting flowers? Across the street, under the warm glow of her porch light, stood Karen Miller, arms crossed, chin tilted just enough to make sure everyone saw her victory stance, and on her face, that smirk, the kind of smug, self-satisfied look that didn't just say, "I won, but I own you now." "I told you people, you can't ignore our rules. Now the law is on my side," she called, her voice cutting through the night like broken glass. Her phone was already up, red recording light blinking as she caught every second. Emily rose slowly to her feet, her gardening gloves streaked with soil, eyes locked on the officers. "This property isn't in your HOA," she stammered, her voice steady but trembling just under the surface. "We have documents." The taller officer stepped forward, his tone clipped and formal. "Documents. You can explain that at the station, ma'am. Please come with us." For a heartbeat, everything went silent. I saw Emily's face change, the confusion draining into something heavier. Her pride, her calm, everything she carried herself with, collapsing under the weight of this absurd scene. And behind her, like a shadow feeding off it, Karen let out a low, satisfied laugh. "That's what happens to people who think they're above the law," she said, every syllable dripping with the victory she didn't earn. My hands curled into fists at my sides. Heat rose in my chest until it burned my throat. Watching my wife, the strongest, most dignified woman I'd ever known, being treated like some criminal over flowers, while that petty tyrant across the street soaked in every second of her humiliation, it made my vision blur. Hatred, pure, searing, cold hatred. Not just at Karen, but at the whole broken system that let someone like her weaponize authority to crush anyone who dared to live outside her little fiefdom. For a heartbeat, Emily didn't move. Soil clung to her gloves, sirens painted the house in flashing blue, and Karen's smug little laugh echoed across the street. Then Emily straightened, her shoulders squared, her chin lifted, and when she spoke, her voice cut the air clean in half. "Officers," she said, every syllable hard as steel, "state the exact law you are enforcing on private property right now." The taller cop shifted, glancing at his partner. "Ma'am, we received an HOA call." "HOA," Emily snapped, stepping forward, "is not a federal or state authority." Her tone carried the kind of weight you didn't argue with. "Now open your database and run my name, Captain Emily Reeves, U.S. Army, Military Police, active duty." Silence hit harder than the sirens ever could. The taller officer froze mid-step. The second's fingers flew across his tablet, his face draining of color. Then, in unison, both men snapped to rigid attention, heels clicking against the pavement. And then, the salute. Karen blinked once, twice, the smirk on her face melting into a pale mask. "That doesn't matter. She still has to follow HOA rules." Emily turned her head, slowly, deliberately. That look, I'd seen it before back when she ran training exercises, commanding entire squads with nothing but her voice. Calm, controlled, absolutely lethal. "You," Emily said, every word measured, "just called the police on an active U.S. Army military police officer because I was planting flowers on my own land." She removed her gloves, one deliberate pull at a time, her eyes never leaving Karen. "I hope you have a very good attorney." Karen opened her mouth, but no sound came out. The officers didn't even glance her way. Their eyes stayed forward, their salute unwavering. And for the first time that night, the balance shifted. Both officers turned in unison, their salutes dropping as they faced Karen. The taller one's voice was calm but absolute. "Ma'am, you understand you've made a false emergency report and abused law enforcement resources. You need to come with us." For a second, Karen just stood there, her mouth opening and closing like she couldn't form words. Then her voice cracked into a high, desperate shriek. No, this is a mistake. I was enforcing community rules." But the echo of her protest died quickly, replaced by the sound of doors opening and footsteps on pavement. One by one, neighbors poured out of their houses, drawn by the sirens and the sudden stillness. Phones lifted, screens glowed. Some people whispered to each other. Others didn't bother to hide the smirks. And then someone clapped, once, sharply, before a ripple of applause spread through the crowd. For the first time since we moved in, Karen Miller, queen of her little kingdom, didn't look powerful. She didn't look untouchable. She just looked small. I crossed the lawn to Emily. The rigid line of her shoulders softened as she saw me, and for the first time that night, she let herself smile. A quiet, knowing smile. "Guess they'll remember now," she murmured, her voice low enough for only me to hear, "that our house isn't part of their HOA. The officers gave Emily one final salute before turning back to Karen. This time, it wasn't a formality. It was respect. Earned, not given. Karen's protests dissolved into silence as they guided her toward the cruiser. The door shut with a muted thud, and through the tinted glass, I saw her pale face staring out, the smirk gone, replaced by the cold weight of consequences. Emily slipped her hand into mine as we turned back toward the house, and as the sirens faded down the street, I felt it. A shift so subtle yet so profound. For the first time since we'd moved in, our home didn't just belong to us on paper. It finally felt like ours.